let me first introduce the panel to you, and I'm going to ask each of the panel members to give us an idea of who they are and what they do. I'm going to start with my immediate left, and that's Nancy Reynolds. Nancy, why don't you tell us where you're from and what your role is at the company?
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming. We think this will be actually a great panel. We know it's the end of the first day, and you've all probably done a fair bit of traveling to get here, and we're glad that you're in this room with us. And tell me if this microphone's working all right. I can't. We're good? Okay. So what's interesting is that Thomas and I, although Thomas now works in Germany, and I am near Denver, I work for Western Union, we actually both worked in the Englewood area, which is just south of Denver, so we have that in common, even though we're a very global panel. And then Meredith, who is on the end of the table, she and I both went to the same college, even though she works in New York, and I grew up in Madison and now work in Denver. So we have all these connections, and so you'll see all these great synergies going on. I have worked at Western Union for 8.5 years. I've practiced employment law for 16, and for the last 8 at Western Union. I've just moved into the ethics role in the past 6 months or so. And what's interesting about that is I'm heading up now the ethics office for Western Union, which is a company of about 11,000 employees in 57 different countries in all over the world. So very diverse. And that transition from doing employment law to ethics is an interesting one that I'll speak to you about in the context of our topic today. So I'm happy to be here and look forward to the next few minutes.
Thomas?
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Tom Pfennig. I'm the head of compliance at Bayer AG, so I'm overseeing the global compliance program for the company. I have been with Bayer for 15 years now. I started as a litigator coming from the United States, so I'm a lawyer in both Germany and the US, where I was indeed working at AT&T Broadband in Inglewood, Colorado, and then at BMW North America just across the river. So Bayer is a company of about 120,000 employees. We are divided into 3 major divisions, one being the pharmaceutical division, one being the consumer health division, so the OTC business, if you will say so, and then thirdly, the crop science division, where we are also facing an interesting integration, hopefully, with the acquisition of Monsanto Corporation in the United States. So glad to be here. I think I may have the longest trip to come here. I had my sixth sense switched on because I took the latest flight on Sunday evening out of Frankfurt, and that seemed to be a smart move. So glad to be serving on a panel and discussing open reporting and speaking up with you all.
Thank you, Tom. Meredith, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Meredith Kaufman. I am an attorney at Littler Mendelson. We are the world's largest labor and employment law firm, meaning we do exclusively labor and employment law. We have attorneys all over the U.S. and all over the world dedicated to just that practice. I practice in a variety of areas of labor and employment law, but I've developed a expertise and a focus in whistleblower law, and I've been practicing. I've been at Littler for a little over 8 years. So I've handled some SOX retaliation cases, whistleblower complaints, usually employees who believe that something happened to them, either termination or something else, because they had made a complaint. So we'll be talking about some of that a little bit later.
And I am Ed Ellis, and I'm the co-chair of Littler's Whistleblower and Corporate Ethics Practice Group, and I apologize that my co-chair, Chip Jones from Dallas, was unable to make it due to the weather. So I'm going to start off, we're here to talk about the speak-up culture, how to foster an effective speak-up culture at the company. And I'm going to start off by asking Tom if he could explain to us what Bayer is doing globally and in the U.S. to foster a speak-up culture.
Thank you. So as a German, as you can imagine, I've been trying to prepare myself perfectly for this opportunity. And I thought I'd give you maybe the 3 pillars that we believe are the most important parts, at least for our company, to effectively establish and maintain a speak-up culture. I think, first of all, I would say it's the human aspect. I do a lot of compliance awareness town halls, compliance breakfasts, lunch and learns, and I do expect the same from my 36 heads of compliance in the world. So really putting a face to compliance, getting out, talking to people, making sure they understand the importance of speaking up is a huge asset in my view. When I give my presentations, I try to draw some analogies which are easily digestible and make sense to people. And just yesterday, riding the subway, I came along this sign that caught my eye just almost 10 years ago, which basically goes, if you see something, say something. And I think it's very compelling to everyone in New York City riding the subway, but overall, that if you are the whistleblower in that case, I'm sure you're going to be the hero at the end of the day. And I think if you bring analogies like that into a room full of people who ask themselves, should I speak up or not? And combine it with what I also think is another analogy, speaking up is like an insurance policy. If people at Volkswagen had spoken up, I'm sure they might have had less exposure than they have seen in the news lately. So I think that's the first element, the human part. Secondly, I think technology is important as well. Sometimes the hurdles to speak up could be quite challenging, including accessing your hotline system. So we came up with an app which has been pushed to all 40,000 smartphones in the company mandatorily. Didn't want to wait for people to download it. Where you, by simply clicking a button, get to our Expo link. Don't want to make too much disclosure here. A third-party hotline. You can generate a web report, and you can actually also send an encrypted email to us. So lowering the threshold of really getting access to these, I'd say, systems is very important, and that also means that the hotline should be able to speak the 44 languages that are spoken at Bayer, for example. And I think thirdly, it's the processes behind this. How do you incentivize? How do you recognize people? Is it part maybe even of your performance management system to be open and transparent? At Bayer, we subscribe to what we call the life values: leadership, integrity, flexibility, and efficiency. And integrity is a big part. So making sure that people get rewarded, get incentivized, is also important. The one thing that I also say, we don't want to generate a culture of pure whistleblowing in our organization. So we want to make sure that people maturely talk to each other as professionals. They speak up in their respective teams to the supervisors, and talking to the compliance professional or the hotline certainly is an important option or opportunity, but we just don't want to have a culture where 120,000 people all the time call the hotline because they have an issue. So these three elements are important to Bayer when we talk about establishing an effective speak-up culture, and would like to hear from all of you how you do it, obviously.
Tom, I have a sort of a side question here. In the U.S., the term whistleblower conjures up all sorts of things. You get Karen Silkwood, you get Aaron Brockovich, you get Serpico, and you also get Edward Snowden. And it can mean a lot of different things. In cultures outside the U.S., does the use of that term help or impede your ability to foster a speak-up culture?
So if you were to translate whistleblower into German, it would come up with a nasty word nobody wants to be using: Petzer. If you're in kindergarten and you're a Petzer, you're going to be way out there in the corner and nobody will be talking to you anymore. So I think we need to position or reposition the term in a way that it's not being perceived as a Petzer. I go back to my analogy: if you see something, say something. However I call that person, whistleblower or reporter, I don't care. I want to know about it. And I think if the tone from the top, from the middle is there, and in my compliance awareness town halls, I really request that what we call senior Bayer representatives, the SPRs, who are the presidents of the respective countries, I request that they are there when I give my town hall, so that people see it's not just Tom Fennig showing up, it's the leadership team showing up and they support what he's saying. So I think, just going back to your question, we use the term whistleblower even in Germany. But I want to reemphasize, it is not that we want to foster pure whistleblowing, meaning anonymous reporting into the compliance hotline. It is speaking up. It is talking to your colleagues, to HR, whatever your company is offering. And if you position it like that, whistleblowing gets a little bit into a different meaning. So we use it, but it's not negatively perceived in the company.
Nancy, a question for you. What does the speak up culture mean at Western Union?
So we do use that terminology. I know a lot of companies use that in their codes of conduct. We're actually redoing our code of conduct right now. And that in and of itself has been a fascinating experience, because if you are in the process of redoing your code, and from what I understand, it's good to do that maybe every 3 to 4 years, or maybe more often now, as things change so quickly. If you have stakeholders reviewing it, as I've had our in-house counsel look at it, they look at it as they should, like they look at a lot of things, and I'm accustomed to looking at things as a contractual document. And then you think, oh, well, if you say you're going to do something, you have to do exactly that, and you have all these qualifying provisions, and you're going to maybe review something if there's misconduct, but you don't want to leave it too open-ended. So you're always, if you did that to your code of conduct, no one would speak up, right? I mean, if you go through those kinds of paces, so you're balancing this tension. And what I'm going to be doing when I'm speaking with my in-house counsel, because I've got these great comments from him, and we're going to talk through and figure out where we're going to land with this code, is that I am balancing for Western Union the risk of, yes, we want to follow what we say in the code, and we will do that. And also, we want to have a code that's broad enough and says enough about how we're going to handle complaints that people think it's worth my time to make a complaint. The company's actually going to do something. They're going to listen to it, and they're going to take it seriously and handle it. Because that's something people, they do that process in their head. They go through, is it even worth my time? Will the company do anything about it? And then, am I going to be retaliated against? Those are the main 2 questions that people care about. And they especially care about it if it's something that they observe that's not happening to them. They see it going on to somebody else, and they think, well, you know, I don't think this is right. I think the way this manager is treating their subordinate or my colleague, it's unprofessional, it's not okay. These are kind of things that if they're allowed to continue, they can really develop and snowball. Those are the things where you want people to say, yeah, I have an obligation to the company to say something. The company is going to take it seriously and do something. So I'm right now thinking about how do we word the language in our code to engender that kind of a response from our employees. And we use the speak up language. We have, Thomas mentioned, you know, how do you incorporate the speak up culture into even performance management, or how you maybe perhaps compensate employees. That can get complicated, you know, globally. But we do have what we call kind of a culture of compliance component, where we assess how employees have done. It includes whether they took their training or not, and includes other things that their managers assess if they've modeled the behaviors we have at Western Union, or the values like Bayer has. So all of those things would fall under what Western Union is seeking to do to truly create a speak-up culture. You may have heard in the news we had a DOJ settlement fairly recently, and that actually pertains to a period of time going back of several years for us. But that, you know, you wonder, as with Volkswagen, Wells Fargo, any company, how do you get employees to a place where if they'll come forward and maybe you can address things sooner? That's what you want as a company, and you want employees to want the same thing. And you will get employees who will complain about all kinds of things also, and you have to deal with that also. And you will get employees who complain, you know, maybe weekly to you, and you've looked into everything and you've not found anything to be substantiated, but maybe the 15th thing they bring to you is actually something that you really need to address and dig into even more deeply, and you do find something is substantiated. So you even you have to take everything seriously regardless of who it's coming from.
We're going to move to, is that a question in the back?
Well, everybody talks about Wells Fargo. People did actually speak up. They were fired. They can't get jobs. So how do you reconcile promoting to speak up
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that's a great question, and it goes a little bit into my third pillar, the processes and incentivation, but I think also protecting whistleblowing. In the EU, there's actually a regulation coming out that you need to obviously have some systems in place that protects them. I think the challenge really is how to do it, especially if they were involved in certain schemes. And I am honestly struggling with not separating from individuals who have been part of a scheme. Nevertheless, I think you want to obviously somehow incentivize them speaking up, ideally within the company, but also, of course, outside the company. And there are some fine lines that I believe you can potentially draw. In some countries, people are working on a visa basis. So rather than separating immediately, you may give them another month or two before they have to exit and return into their home country, so that in the meantime they can perhaps look for alternatives. But at the end of the day, it's really this cultural thing. And I see this also, that people in the lower ranks and files may see something and may speak up perhaps in their respective departments, but then here, no, this is the way we've been doing it over the last years, and that's how we're going to do it over the next years, and they don't go beyond that level. So I think if you put this face out there, as I mentioned, that you will be protected even though you go beyond your supervisor's back if necessary, and you have a few cases that you can point at to make sure that people see this is indeed happening and it's not just word of mouth. And it's spreading relatively quickly, I would say, if you have some of these cases, not just in the country, but actually in an entire region. So really having these opportunities, which is not happening too often, and using them is a rare moment, and the compliance professionals at Bayer really try to take advantage of those.
Somebody else had a question in the back?
follow up on your discussion about having a culture where everyone knows you're going to take action. We actually disclosed the results of some of our investigations, and I'm wondering if we do so also. I know there's a different view on whether you should or you should not. We kind of took the position that I don't care if the person sues us, because I disclosed the results when they're doing something inappropriate. So I'm just wondering if the panel gets the same.
Are you saying you disclosed the results of all investigations, no matter?
All because we're a multinational company and it would be voluminous.
But that's good. That's a good sign, right?
Welcome to the club.
No, we put out like a monthly or sometimes quarterly, basically a report via email to all of our people in the company, and we'll disclose the results of 3 or 4 investigations. Some find, some they're clear, and some will say the person's fired. Now, we don't try to put the name in there, but if you're in the country where it happened, you know who it was.
Nancy, do you want to comment? Tom?
Go ahead. And then
So there's a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, we are also being more open with the numbers of investigations and the outcomes internally than in the past, because in my view, it's also a very compelling argument why you should take these compliance trainings. In some countries, people complain, I have to do another compliance training. We are not in the news. Nothing is happening. Why should I? And if they hear, oh, there was cases in my country I wasn't aware of, it's much easier to sell these compliance trainings to people. Now, I think at Bayer, we are going a little bit of a different path. When we are disclosing cases, we try to spin this in a bit less technical way. So we have 2 video formats that we are using. One is, a 60-second infomercial, as we call it, where people basically talk about their experience with compliance, not necessarily in the context of an investigation, but in the context of compliance business partnering, so that people see if you talk to compliance, you're going to be helped. So that is one format. The second one goes more into your direction. These are 2-minute video stories that we are producing, and we try to release them on a quarterly basis. It's a lot of effort, so we may not succeed all the time. But the point is, we see trends in the organization. We see violations, we see clusters. And of course, anti-corruption is a matter for all of us. Conflict of interest is another one at Bayer, for example. So we try to pick cases that we see in our global case management system and convert them into those 2-minute video stories. We usually do not use the people who were part of that as actors, but we use professional actors. But these are powerful messages to be communicated, and people, as you said, they get the message. What case are we talking about if they were in the perimeters of that activity?
Meredith, let me turn to you for a second. We have situations, I know you're involved in situations where the compliance process has broken down and you end up in litigation. And I'd like you to give us, your feedback on what you think companies could do better in these situations, how they arise, and what companies could do better to avoid them.
Sure. So in a whistleblower litigation, there's typically really 2 main elements of the case. First, you have the person's complaints or their protected activity, whatever concerns they raise to the company. And then you have some kind of an adverse employment action that happened, whether they were terminated or something else. And in the litigation, they're going to try to show that the first was the cause of the second. And on the company side, we would try to show that that they were unrelated and that the complaint did not play into the termination. So there are. Hindsight is always 20/20, and so when we go through a case like this, we always see ways where things can be done better. The first, in terms of the termination decisions, and I think this is the same for any employment litigation that you might have, proper performance management and communication around a termination is always key to preventing potential lawsuits when people are terminated and it's out of the blue and they don't understand why. There's always a risk that they're going to look for a different reason other than whatever the real reason might have been for the termination to explain to themselves how they ended up in the situation. So maybe they meet with a plaintiff's lawyer, or maybe they just think to themselves or do some research on the internet and think, well, I raised this issue with my manager. I think now this is why I was terminated. In terms of the complaints, there's a number of issues that I think we see. I think a major theme for this is, and I think this is consistent with a lot of what we've heard all day, is that employers should always overreact. I've never seen a case where we would look at what happened with a complaint and say, you know what, we should have done less in response to this complaint. Sometimes it's a formal complaint that's very clear what the concerns are, but a lot of times employees are not so clear. Maybe they are asking more of a question about, well, whether is this okay, or I'm unsure, and the answer maybe is given short shrift, like, yes, this is fine, and they're never really explained why the practice is okay. And that might not be enough. It might look in the litigation that it was sort of just brushed aside and not taken seriously. So I think being able to recognize that when employees are expressing concerns and maybe doing more than you might initially be inclined to do in that situation, then you'll have a much more defensible record in going forward, that if you do end up in that situation, that you can look back and say, well, yeah, they raised these concerns and this is how we addressed them thoroughly. So I think the being able to recognize the complaints and taking them seriously is really important. And I think as Karen mentioned earlier, that we had if you're trying to get to that point where you have the 15th complaint is finally the one that's important that we care about actually getting for the business, we're not going to get there if the earlier complaints were not paid attention to. So just for, I think, compliance purposes in general, you may never hear the important issues that you want to address in your business if you're not paying attention to the smaller issues.
One thing I'm just thinking, and maybe I think Meredith, you might have some good ideas for this. So the gentleman who asked in the back about, well, Wells Fargo, there were people who, did complain or raise concerns, and they lost their job. So how about that? And I one thought I'm having is, yeah, how about that? Because there are avenues now they can pursue, and that's what gives companies, fear when those employees get together and pursue avenues. Like what, I mean, maybe Meredith could speak to what could be down the road. Like, how is this going to play out? Because it might seem like, well, that didn't work, and it didn't work, right? But on the other hand, we're going to see how this does play out. And this is what we don't, I don't know if there'll be a class action or what's going to happen, but Meredith might have some thoughts on that.
I mean, certainly if you have an environment where people are complaining and being terminated for it, it would have a chilling effect on any future complaints. But once it does come to light, then, the company hopefully can take steps to change their practices, better training for managers, and other ways to sort of take a preventative measures. And I think it's a lesson really to all employers that you can have the best possible policies in place, but if the people who are on the ground aren't, following the way you would like your business to be run, you can have a significant exposure that maybe you don't even know about. So having those middle-level managers knowing how to respond to complaints and not making decisions on their own as to whether something is important enough to go to legal or go to HR or go to someone in compliance, that they really should be trained to always seek partnership with someone when they have a concern raised, because you don't necessarily want them determining if this is an issue or not, and you want to know what's going on.
In a company the size of Bayer, what do you do to try to get the tone in the middle?
Yes. So a couple of examples maybe is the best approach. So for example, we all probably have some business opportunities in China. Bayer has 6,000 people in China and about 22 compliance professionals. So you can do the math how well they are permeating the organization. So we came up with this concept of compliance champions, where in each sales and marketing organization, which is 6 to 8 people in a cluster, there's one compliance champion who is the conduit between the compliance professionals and the business organization. And actually, he or she is wearing this hat for 2 years, and then he is passing it on. That has helped us a lot gaining traction, getting questions about policy, interpretation, and so forth. And obviously, they are being rewarded also, these people. So I think that is one of the examples that I wanted to share. Then the second one, and I'm really proud of this, I don't know if anybody has done something similar. We just finished filming a compliance video game training on our corporate compliance policy. So we have 10 principles in our corporate compliance policy, and we converted each of those principles into a story, into a thriller maybe, with dilemma situations. And this is an interesting, there's 63 decision trees behind those, so really a lot of effort. But we then casted Bayer employees to be actors in this compliance training. So overall, we have now 38 people from 25 countries acting in this corporate compliance video game training. And that is a powerful message, because the people in those countries, in these corporate functions, will be waiting for their peer to show up in the video and speak on their behalf, hopefully. So that is another example where we try to really bring this home so that everybody feels represented.
I don't want to make too much light of it, but who does better in the video games, the 25-year employees or the kids right out of high school?
First of all, there's amazing talent in at least our organization. I would have never thought these people were accountants or HR professionals once they are having the camera in front of them. And this is really interesting. So the camera is a system where the camera is in front of the cameraman. Okay, so he wears a helmet and the camera is shooting this from an ego perspective. So you look into the camera as if you were looking into the eyes of your colleague. And as soon as this camera was on, those 38 people were Oscar really Oscar-worthy people. So I can't tell if it's the the graduate we just hired or the 25. We had a board member, actually a board member for technology, innovation, and human resources, play the guy in the safety part of this corporate compliance policy training, and he has been with the company for over 30 years and did very well.
That's great. Nancy, what do you do to get the tone in the middle?
I can't top that, but I can tell you, I saw his video because I asked for it. I don't know, I mean, I think you're still in process, right? But I got to see a little snippet, and it is fantastic. And I would give Thomas an Oscar. So I'm looking forward to seeing, hopefully, the whole thing. I think that the idea of bringing everybody into the compliance organization or making them feel engaged or part of it. I mean, the way Western Union is set up is the ethics office is fairly small. We just have 5 of us. And then the compliance organization is thousands. And that's because of what we do. I mean, it's a money transfer company, so it's anti-money laundering. That's the risk that we're managing. And we're in 200 different countries and territories. So you can imagine the regulations that compliance organization is handling and that kind of risk. So what our head of compliance does is she continually takes opportunities to show people how what they're doing in their role in the company, where they would think, I have nothing to do with compliance, how they're inextricably linked to what compliance is doing. And she's getting in front of them all the time and speaking to different groups and saying, here's how you're supporting what we're doing in compliance. And we're getting to a place where regulators from governments all over the world are coming to Western Union and asking her, our general counsel, how do we manage through these things, and how should we write these laws, and how, I mean, there was someone who spoke, the gentleman from LinkedIn, Amin, I believe, who said, here's what I want to have happen. Not for us to look and say, how is the government going to regulate this and tell us what to do? How about if we come forward as companies, as compliance experts, and say, here are the solutions? Because we have an entry point that's unique, and we can really make a difference and work together actually with regulators and help shape these places. They were talking about the data and things like that. So what Thomas is doing at Bayer, I think, is brilliant. And I think it's creative, and maybe I will steal it. If I can, I'll talk to Thomas later.
No copyright.
But no, I would not. But we, to have people feel like, A, it's fun, it's appealing, it's engaging at some level, and then just to be a part of something. It doesn't seem so other than. It doesn't seem like compliance is this other thing, or ethics is separate from what I do, because that's what I think is a challenge. So I applaud what Bayer's doing. I think it sounds really cool.
And I'm happy to, speak up and tell you a little bit more how this works.
Nicely done.
The third, just came to my mind, and maybe, I don't know, should have not become a lawyer in my real life. But we also do what we call Compliance Innovation Awards. And we had last year, Al Rosa from GE was there as a keynote speaker, and there's at least one member of the board attending. So what we were soliciting were examples of, business units, departments where compliance played a role and how they coped with it. And surprisingly, we got 65 submissions from all continents. And we invited these teams to Cologne, Germany, and had a blast, really. Big video, also sent it around. And the winner was actually not someone from law or patents. It was one of the research teams who had to cope with data privacy issues. And data privacy is also part of compliance in our organization. So we invited these R&D people on stage, and the whole R&D community was watching, literally. And it brought us much closer to their realm, to their kingdom. And I'm sure that there were a few compliance ambassadors coming out of that interaction. So again, these are some lighthouse projects, and you don't need many, in my view, if they are well done. But if they are well done, they will last a long time.
Yes, sir.
Could you give us some insight on your thoughts on why people do not speak up?
Well, let's see. I'm trying to think of there's a simple, straightforward answer that comes to me immediately, and then there are probably some more complex things that would be more interesting to you. So initially, I think people think, my job's going okay. I have a family. I need to pay my bills. Why would I raise something that's going to potentially create blowback for me? Like, why am I going to create waves? I'm going to be viewed as, I can't say the German term, but that word that you, if you're in kindergarten and you go to the back of the room, that you don't want to be called. So we are conscious. We won't use the word whistleblower. I mean, if someone's saying, I am a whistleblower, please call me that, but that doesn't usually quite happen like that. But, we're careful about the terminology that we'll use. We wouldn't necessarily assign that, because we want to think of people that are bringing concerns in a positive light. Like, they're giving us a gift of awareness. They're giving us an opportunity to hear something that we maybe need to hear and do something about. So I think there's a mindset you want to have. And I continue to go to meetings with high-level people, and they still feel like having a low number of complaints is good. And if the number goes down every year, that's better, So it's very foreign still to people that aren't operating in this space, that you want to have people come forward. You want to have conversations. If you had a friendship or a relationship with someone and you never heard from them, that you would think was not a positive thing. I mean, you should be hearing from a certain percentage of your employee population. What Thomas is talking about, also engaging at a lower level, my guess is, and he can speak to this, if he has this data, the stuff he's doing with these videos, you start in these awards, you start to hear from people at lower and lower and lower levels. And they have really, really good ideas. And even new people that come in within their first, month or year, they feel like, oh, I have something to contribute and my voice matters. So people don't come forward because they think, why rock the boat? This is only going to end up badly for me. This isn't going to help me. And so the company's not really going to do anything. And it'll just kind of, be dismissed. Or something will really bad happen to me if I do this. My manager, Ed was talking about, and we heard the statistics earlier today, people look to their immediate manager as, this is how I should act. Because this is the person I see the most. This is the closest example to me of who the company is. And why would I want to complain? Because that's going to make my manager look bad. Maybe my manager's not going to like that. They're really busy. And so I think they go through all of these thoughts in their mind. But if they have a stronger voice, that is, the company is saying, if you care about this company and we care about this company, we're asking you to come forward. Like, that's really, we want that. We encourage that. Even if you think you're not sure if what you have to say is even an issue, we still want to hear about it. So you have to overcome all these other voices. And it's something you have to do on a constant, regular basis, because the other voices are really, really strong. And they're very prominent. And what ethics does and compliance does is it offers another voice that's a stronger voice and overcomes all of those hesitancies.
So just picking up on your question, I would separate the pool of whistleblowers into those who are directly involved into activity and those who are the sideliners, okay, who observe something but have not been part of a scheme. Now, for the first group, I think the reason why they wouldn't speak up is reasonably obvious, right? And that's where I'm going back. If you're one of those members of a scheme, what is the incentive for me to speak up? And that's where we are, quite frankly, struggling. And what I observe is, usually some strong team leaders in those organizations who drive behavior, and others are just the followers, but they do what the strong team leader says. And at the end of the day, they are all in one boat. And obviously, that speaking up in that boat is difficult because it might sink entirely. The second group, the sideliners, the bystanders, their motivation to speak up, I would imagine, is much higher. But then it again comes to technology. So I can tell you in our hotline, for example, and we've been trying to beef up our hotline because there were some major deficiencies. We had up to 60% hung-ups in the hotline. Okay, so we get hundreds, over 1,000 calls into the hotline, but we generate less than a third of actual reports. And we looked into this. Why is that the case? So first of all, there's a lot of people who hang up right after they call because, you know, they may have a second thought, I don't know. A large chunk is hanging up while they are waiting for the translator, we observed. Especially if you talk a language that's not so frequently spoken, it might take, in our case, up to 8 minutes to get the translator into the line. So what we do now there is, rather than having this bi-directional conversation, which I personally prefer, we give them the option to just drop their message in a voice file, and at least we have it in the system, okay? It's not the best, but it's a compromise where we at least capture what they want to tell us. The third group hangs up while on the call, actually, and I don't know if somebody comes to the door and they don't want to be observed and they hang up, or is it just the capability of expressing themselves, or is it, example, calling somebody from Brazil, asking for somebody speaking Portuguese, they plug in a translator from Portugal who speaks a very different Portuguese language than the folks in Brazil, not connecting, hanging up. So, you know, lowering the technology thresholds for those bystanders has been a major challenge, but opportunity at Bayer, and we'll be seeing whether the numbers are improving because we just installed these measures. So,
Do you, when there are like cultural differences, some groups may, tend to speak up more than others. Do you have specific type of different approach for countries or regions where it's harder to get people speaking up?
Tom, could you repeat the question so the folks
yes,
in the back
so
can hear?
obviously there's cultural differences, mentalities are different, and are we, and I'm asking myself, having any mechanisms or measures to kind of A, identify those weak spots, and B, remedy it? And the answer is twice yes. In Eastern Europe, for example, in Northern Africa, well, some pockets, maybe not. In Asia, although I think with WeChat, and I don't know if it's the WhatsApp equivalent in China, for example, which we actually allow to use. It's very easy to audio record something. It's very easy to take a picture and send it to us. So technology, again, helping these people. So we look into the hotline data, and we see how many employees do we have in one country and how many calls do we get or have we gotten over the last 2 to 3 years. And I mentioned compliance awareness town halls. I pick these spots, and I go there, and I assemble a room of 150 plus people, and I really would like to have everybody in the room, and I specifically talk about open reporting, speaking up. And I do this once a month, so you can imagine I come around quite a bit, and it has a big impact.
Yeah, that's a good reminder that there's so much technology it can do, and there's so much to take advantage of, and also there's nothing that will ever replace being in person. So doing in-person training, to the degree there's always a cost to it, it can be less convenient, there's limited resources. That's why programs like Compliance Champion that Bayer has, and Western Union's looked at doing some different things like having ambassadors. Some companies have ways to expand, the footprint and have more of an in-person presence. I mean, it is fascinating if we travel and we give presentations, we will get more complaints from those areas that we aren't getting, no matter how beautiful or fantastic our technology is. Go ahead, and then there's someone back there.
Yeah, I was in Panama in January, and Panama is a hub for the central region at Bayer, so it's 14 countries connecting in there, including the Caribbean. We had not had many cases, case is different. Is it a case really? It will have to be verified, but at least contacts into the hotline. After my town hall, 4 in February. So that's the impact that you are generating, in my view.
There's a question over there
And then,
in the front.
So there's some studies that recently have said that about 80 to 85% of issues are actually reported to frontline management instead of going through your hotline. So I'm curious, do you rely exclusively on your hotline data to do some of your analysis, or do you have a way to capture and track some of those issues that are reported to your managers? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, we do. We put everything we get it from a lot of different sources, and we do keep track of the percentage that's coming kind of on a monthly basis, whether it's coming via the hotline, directly to the ethics office. We have ways that they can email us, call us directly, to a manager, if it comes through HR. I mean, what's interesting, and Meredith was speaking to, you know, ways that kind of these things can bubble up. What we'll notice at our company is there are some employees that are very adept at using the resources that are made available to them. And they will go to HR, their manager, ethics, and I don't know, somebody else, all in the span of like 2 days. And we know that's something to pay attention to. And we, you know, so we talk amongst each other, so we kind of know what's going on. We have to keep, you know, walls of separation to some degree as well with some of those groups. But yes, so that we get. I mean, that doesn't surprise me, what you said about the percentage of going to their direct managers. Now, what sometimes will happen is sometimes they will complain about their manager to their manager. And their manager will think, well, I know that's not a problem, and I will investigate it myself. And I just did, and it's all good. We're good. And then, you know, like 5 months down the road, we'll hear about this, and they'll think, oh, that was investigated. Oh, really? Well, by who? And so, you know, it is the training and getting it to come forward. But that goes back to Thomas's point about Panama and the in-person contact. I mean, I think sometimes people, maybe they crave that even more because technology has such a tremendous presence. But the anonymity piece, obviously, that's what is so helpful with a hotline, is that people have the option of being anonymous. I think and there are some global issues with that too. There's some issues with the helpline and anonymity that you have to manage from a legal employment law perspective, but yeah.
Question
So
over
can I
here?
just respond to this to get our perspective as well? So as I mentioned, we have 10 principles in our corporate compliance code of conduct, and if the topic that is raised with with a direct report relates to one of those 10 topics, we want to know about it. So we want the manager to let us know what's going on and actually take over the investigation if necessary. There's one topic, fair and respectful working conditions, which we also have in our corporate code of conduct, where I have to differentiate. Is this a dispute because somebody felt improperly rated in the performance management, which I don't think is a compliance topic? This is something that can be dealt with between the two of them. Or is this something related to harassment, sexual discrimination, and so forth? Then I want to know about it. And then I put it into, we have a global case management and case tracking database. We have to have robust numbers. So I expect this to be reported to us. And there are maybe some other ideas to share. This is something I heard from other companies doing. Simplification and not creating a lot of bureaucracy when you are expected to report is very, very important. So if somebody walks into your door, you may have 1 minute until the next call or meeting takes place, and you hear it. And then, the 15 calls coming, and at the end of the day, you're exhausted. Another day there, you forget about it. So we are currently working on a desktop app where you as a manager have basically a window that opens, and it takes 60 seconds to enter the complaint. And it goes straight into our case management database. So that is really, lowering the access hurdles for those people.
Do we have a call on the back, please? Yeah,
You, yes. You've been patient.
I have two questions. One for you, Thomas. How are you empowering your local compliance champions? We have compliance champions run through each of our strategic business units and corporate functions. It's something that we're sort of starting up. And empowering them, getting them up to speed is phenomenally challenging. It seems like you have multiplied that by a lot. And then we all know that more reporting is better than less reporting. What do you consider a good number per 100 employees, 1,000 employees? How are you measuring that, and where do you want to get to, or what do you consider good?
So I start with the second question because I've looked into numbers, and we all probably know them. And it was interesting to me to see the NAVEX numbers for Europe and APAC being extremely low. It was fascinating, between 0.2 and 0.4% seems to be the industry benchmark. So it's like, really not a lot. When you get numbers from our hotline provider, for example, for Europe, and they cover roughly, I understand, 11 million employees overall, they say it's between 1.5 and 2.5%. And I think it really depends on your culture, technology, tone from everywhere, as I said, whether you are going to looking at this as a benchmark or not. So that's my perspective on your second question. The first one, I really wouldn't want to stop with a compliance champion or ambassador program. We do have an integrated compliance management system where we did really implement functional processes for all the risks that we see in the company. And we did RACI analyses, who should own, who should be the responsible person, who should be informed, consulted, who has the overall accountability. And it is to a large degree business people also, and therefore I would say this is maybe even more important than some lighthouse projects in China with the compliance champion, to have the business people involved in integrating, embedding compliance and really jointly driving this.
Tom, where does your compliance organization report?
So at Bayer, we are still part of the legal department, so it's not separated like in many other cases, I understand. So we overall, I have to bifurcate my answer a little bit. So I'm reporting to the general counsel, and then we both more or less report to the CFO, but I have a global compliance committee, which meets 3 times a year, and that is actually per se headed by the CEO. So with those topics, I go straight to the CEO.
Nancy, how about you?
I report directly to our general counsel, and the head of our compliance organization reports to the board. So we're set up a little bit differently in that manner. You had a question in the front. Go ahead.
Yes, I did. How do you collaborate with other functions such as corporate communications to spread the message and also craft it with human resources and those country managers globally to effectively help rally up the troops and set those tones?
So the 4 or 5 functions that we work most with are, as you said, communications, HR.
We'll repeat the question
So
for you.
what are the functions that we work with, including communications, and how are we going to be utilizing or leveraging this capacity or expertise to drive compliance? So communications, HR, internal audit, risk management, and corporate security. I would say those are my top 5. And in terms of communication, we just started really refining this a little bit based upon the case data that we are generating out of our global system. So if I see a trend in some part of the world, by virtue of increased numbers, I am sitting down with the communications person and try to find out a way to address that target group, either by the video or by infographics or town hall or any other measures. HR, especially when it comes to sanctioning, obviously. Internal audit compliance is by intent not part of my compliance team at Bayer, because we want to really be perceived as business partners and not investigators or police officers. I know in other companies it's a bit different, but I have an internal audit compliance task force that I can utilize upon request if I need to look into something. And we do this together, but the fact-finding and the interviewing is done by them. So that is the second or the third function. And risk management, that's maybe a bit of a luxury. These are process-oriented people, so they help me really define processes and especially also identify processes that do not work effectively and redesign them if necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.